They told me to leave the VIP tent because, in their words, people like me didn't belong there. What they didn't know was that the same person they were trying to push out had quietly kept their entire youth program alive for 6 years. And the strangest part of the whole story is this: I didn't say a single word when they humiliated me. I just stood there and let them make their mistake. My name is Daniel Mercer. And before that afternoon at the Ridgeway National Youth Track Championship, I honestly believed that doing the right thing meant never needing anyone to know you did it. I was wrong. Not because kindness needs applause, but because sometimes the truth has a way of walking into the room at exactly the right moment. I arrived at the championship around 8:30 that morning, carrying the same old canvas bag I had carried for years. It was faded. The handles were starting to fray. And honestly, my daughter had been telling me to throw it away for at least 2 Christmases. She said, "Dad, that bag looks like it survived a war." I laughed and told her, "It has. It survived my garage." Inside that bag were a few notebooks, a camera I barely knew how to use, and one plain white envelope I had been carrying for weeks. I wasn't there for attention. I wasn't there to stand next to some giant sponsor banner or shake hands with executives wearing expensive watches. I came because I wanted to watch a kid I believed in cross the finish line. That was it. Simple. I wore my usual clothes. A gray hoodie with a small bleach mark near the pocket from when I spilled cleaning solution in my garage. Old sneakers with worn heels, and jeans that had seen better decades. I never cared much about looking impressive. Maybe that was my mistake, because some people decide your value before you even open your mouth. The VIP tent was set up beside the track, mostly for sponsors, coaches, former athletes, and board members. I had been invited there through a staff member who knew me, but I didn't expect anyone to recognize me. For years, my contributions had gone through a foundation account. No interviews, no pictures, no plaques with my name on them. I preferred it that way. The program held kids who had talent but not always the money to chase their dreams. Equipment costs, travel expenses, training fees, competition registration, all the little things that quietly stop talented kids before they ever get a chance. Over 6 years, I had helped fund opportunities for dozens of young athletes, not because I wanted to be called generous, but because when I was 17, someone gave me a chance too. Someone paid for my first set of equipment when my family couldn't afford it. I never forgot what that felt like. But Doug Callahan didn't know any of that. Doug was the director of event operations, the kind of man who always seemed to be standing near a camera when something important happened. He wore a perfectly fitted navy blazer, polished shoes, and the kind of smile that disappeared the second nobody important was watching. I had seen him around before. He was good at making people feel like they were lucky to be near him. That morning, I was standing near the water table watching the athletes prepare when Doug walked over. At first, I thought he was coming to say hello. Instead, he stopped about 3 feet away, looked me up and down, and tilted his head slightly. "Excuse me," he said loudly enough for people around us to hear. "You need to move." I looked behind me, thinking maybe he was talking to someone else. "Sorry?" I asked. Doug pointed toward the entrance. "This area is reserved for sponsors and officials only." The conversation around us slowly faded. People noticed. You can always feel when a crowd senses something uncomfortable is about to happen. Doug glanced at my hoodie, then my shoes, then my hands. My fingers still had traces of black marker from helping volunteers label signs earlier that morning. He looked back at my face and gave a small smile that wasn't friendly. "Staff entrance is around the back," he said. I won't ask again. For a second, I just stared at him, not because I didn't understand what he meant, but because I was trying to understand why he felt so comfortable saying it. Then he leaned closer and lowered his voice just enough to make it personal. "Look, this isn't the place for visitors." Visitors. That word stayed with me, because I wasn't a visitor. I had watched this program grow. I had sat at kitchen tables with parents who were worried they couldn't afford another season. I had read letters from kids who said they were ready to quit because they felt like nobody believed in them. But standing there, with a dozen people watching, I realized none of that mattered to Doug. He didn't see the years. He saw a hoodie. He saw old shoes. He saw someone who didn't match the picture he had in his head. Someone nearby laughed quietly. A woman holding a champagne glass whispered something to the man beside her. A teenager lifted his phone, probably hoping he was about to record some dramatic argument. And that was the part that hurt more than Doug's words. Nobody stopped him. Nobody asked if he knew who I was. Nobody wondered if maybe there was more to the story. They just watched. I could have told Doug everything right then. I could have pulled out documents. I could have said, actually, I'm the reason this program exists. I could have embarrassed him in front of everyone, but something inside me stopped. Because the moment you start doing good things just to prove you deserve respect, you lose the reason you started doing them. So I simply looked at him, adjusted the strap on my old canvas bag, and stayed quiet. Then from behind the crowd, a voice cut through the silence. He stays. Everyone turned, and standing there with a gold medal around his neck, his race bib still attached, and his face still glowing from winning the championship race 11 minutes earlier, was 19-year-old Tyler Brooks, the kid I came there to see. And the look on Doug's face told me one thing immediately. He had no idea who he had just insulted. Tyler walked through the crowd slowly, but there was nothing hesitant about him. You could see the exhaustion from the race still on his face. The kind of tiredness that comes after giving everything you have. But somehow he still looked more confident than anyone standing inside that tent. His gold medal bounced lightly against his chest with every step. The same medal everyone had been congratulating him for just minutes earlier. Doug looked at him and gave a small, annoyed laugh, the kind adults sometimes give when they think a young person is being disrespectful instead of brave. Tyler, right? Doug said. Congratulations on the win. Now go enjoy it. This has nothing to do with you. Tyler stopped beside me, not in front of me, not trying to create a scene, just beside me. That small gesture said more than a speech ever could. He wasn't trying to save me. He was showing that he wasn't afraid to stand next to me. Actually, Tyler said, looking straight at Doug, it does have something to do with me. Doug crossed his arms. And why is that? Tyler glanced around the tent, then back at him. Because the person you're asking to leave is the reason I was able to race today? The room changed. You could almost feel everyone paying closer attention. Doug's confident expression faded for half a second, but he quickly recovered. I think there's been some misunderstanding. Tyler shook his head. No, I don't think there has. I reached over and lightly touched Tyler's arm. Tyler, it's okay. I didn't want him getting himself in trouble. I had spent years watching young athletes fight for opportunities, and the last thing I wanted was for one of them to lose focus because of me. But Tyler looked at me and smiled. No, Mr. Mercer, it's not okay. He said it quietly, almost respectfully. And somehow that made it hit harder, because Tyler wasn't angry for the sake of being angry. He was disappointed. He was looking at someone who had just judged a person without knowing the story behind them. Doug stepped closer. I don't know what you think you know, but this is an official area. Tyler replied, funny. I thought this was a place for people who support the athletes. A few people in the crowd looked down. Others suddenly became very interested in their drinks. Nobody wanted to be involved anymore. That's the thing about uncomfortable moments. People love watching them until they realize they might have to choose a side. Doug looked at me again. Who exactly are you? It was almost a challenge, like he was finally giving me permission to explain myself. But I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I reached into my canvas bag and pulled out the white envelope, the one I had been carrying all morning. I looked at Tyler. I was hoping to give this to you after the ceremony. His eyebrows lifted. What is it? Something you earned. I handed it to him. The envelope was simple. No company logo, no fancy presentation, just his name written in pencil. Tyler stared at it for a moment before opening it. The tent became completely silent. I watched his eyes move across the page. At first, he looked confused. Then his expression changed. His shoulders dropped slightly. The excitement from winning the race disappeared, replaced by something deeper, something heavier. He looked at the paper again like he needed to make sure he was reading it correctly. Then he looked up at me. Mr. Mercer. His voice cracked slightly. Is this real? I nodded. Yes. He looked back down. I could see him trying to process it, because sometimes a number is just a number until it represents a door you thought would never open. Tyler had been accepted into a prestigious training program overseas. It was the opportunity he had dreamed about for years, but the cost was something his family simply couldn't handle. Travel, housing, coaching, competition expenses. It was more than they could afford. The envelope contained the full funding package to cover the next stage of his journey. Not a loan, not something he had to repay, just an opportunity. Tyler had spent years thinking he might have to choose between his dream and reality. I wanted him to know that sometimes reality can change. Why didn't you tell me? He asked quietly. I smiled. Because I wanted you to win today without carrying that pressure. Tyler shook his head slowly. You've been helping me this whole time, haven't you? I didn't answer right away. Sometimes silence tells the truth better than words. His eyes filled with emotion, and he looked away for a second. My mom said someone was helping with my training costs, but nobody would tell us who. I smiled. Your mom was very good at keeping promises. Tyler laughed softly through the emotion. She knew? She knew enough. I looked around the tent. The point was never for you to know my name. The point was for you to know someone believed in you. For a moment, Doug disappeared from the room. The crowd disappeared. The judgment disappeared. It was just a young man realizing that someone had quietly believed in him long before anyone was cheering his name. But then Doug spoke again. Wait. Everyone looked back. His voice sounded different now. Less confident. More uncertain. Are you saying? He stopped. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. He finally understood. The person he had tried to remove from the VIP tent wasn't someone looking for a free seat. He was the person who had helped build the foundation they were celebrating. A few minutes later, one of the board members, Melissa Grant, approached. She had been standing near the back the entire time. She looked embarrassed, not because she had done anything wrong, but because she realized she had watched something happen and stayed silent. Daniel, she said softly, is there something you need to tell us? I looked at her. I don't think I need to tell you anything. She looked toward Tyler holding the envelope, then toward Doug. Actually, I think we need to talk. The next few hours changed everything. Records were reviewed. Old financial reports were pulled. Emails from previous years were opened. And for the first time, many people inside that organization saw the full picture. They discovered that the person Doug treated like he didn't belong was the same person who had quietly funded scholarships, travel expenses, equipment purchases, and emergency assistance for families who were struggling. 6 years of support, hundreds of thousands of dollars, dozens of young athletes who got a chance because someone cared enough to help. The uncomfortable truth was simple. Everyone loved celebrating the success story, but very few people knew who helped create it. Doug tried to explain himself afterward. He said he was just protecting the VIP area. He said he didn't know. And maybe that was true. Maybe he really didn't know. But the problem wasn't that he didn't recognize me. The problem was that he believed he didn't need to. He thought someone's appearance gave him enough information. And that was the mistake he couldn't take back. By the end of the week, the board held a meeting about what happened. They didn't just discuss Doug's behavior that afternoon. They discussed the culture that allowed it to happen. The way people were treated based on how they dressed, who they knew, or what they appeared to have. And Doug's position within the organization was no longer guaranteed. But for me, the most important moment didn't happen in that meeting. It happened when Tyler called me 3 days later. He said, I keep thinking about what happened in that tent. I asked him why. He said, because everyone thought you didn't belong there, but you were the person who belonged there the most. I laughed when he said that. Not because it wasn't meaningful, but because life has a strange sense of humor. The person wearing the oldest shoes in the room ended up being the one who had carried the biggest responsibility. The person everyone ignored ended up being the reason everyone was celebrating. And Doug Hartley learned something that day, that money, titles, and authority never teach people. Respect isn't something you give only to those who look important. It's something you show before you know who someone really is. But the story didn't end there. Because a few weeks after the championship, when the board released their statement and the community learned the truth about what happened inside that tent, people started asking another question, one that nobody expected. They wanted to know why I had stayed anonymous for so long and what I planned to do next. And the answer I gave changed the entire program forever. When people finally learned the full story, I expected the reaction to be different. I thought there would be anger. Maybe people would focus on Doug. Maybe everyone would want someone to blame. But what surprised me was how many people reached out and admitted something much harder. They realized they had been part of the problem too. They weren't the ones who said the words. They weren't the ones who told me to leave. But they stood there, watched it happen, and stayed quiet. And I understood that feeling because I had done the same thing in other moments of my own life. We all like to imagine we would step forward when something is wrong. But sometimes we don't. Sometimes we wait for someone else to be brave first. A month after the championship, I was invited back to the program's annual celebration. This time, there were cameras everywhere. Board members, coaches, athletes. and families were all there. A few people joked that I should probably wear something nicer this time. I looked down at my same old gray hoodie and laughed. I told them, this hoodie already knows the building better than I do. And for the first time, everyone laughed with me, not at me. Tyler stood on stage that night, holding the same gold medal he had won weeks earlier. But before he talked about his race, he talked about something else. He talked about believing someone cared before he ever became a champion. He talked about how easy it is to notice success after it happens, but how important it is to support someone when nobody is watching yet. Then he looked directly at me and said, "Mr. Mercer didn't give me a shortcut. He gave me a chance." That sentence stayed with me, because that was always the point. The envelope was never about the money. The money was just a tool. The real gift was telling someone, your dream matters. As for Doug, I heard different versions of what happened afterward. Some people said he apologized because he finally understood. Others said he only apologized because his position was at risk. Maybe both were true. People are complicated. We all have moments when we fail, and what defines us is whether we learn from those moments or protect our pride. I never wanted revenge against Doug. I never wanted to destroy him. Honestly, I think the world has enough people trying to win by tearing someone else down. What mattered to me was that the organization looked at itself honestly and decided what kind of place it wanted to become. A place where people were welcomed because they mattered, not because they looked like they belonged. Years later, when I look back on that afternoon, the thing I remember most isn't Doug's words. It isn't the embarrassment or the silence from the crowd. It's Tyler walking across that tent with a medal around his neck and standing beside me without knowing what would happen next. That young man had every reason to celebrate his own victory. Instead, he used that moment to defend someone else. And maybe that's the real measure of character. Not what you do when everyone is cheering for you, but what you do when you're the only person willing to speak. So if there's one thing I hope people take from my story, it's this. Be careful about the stories you create in your head about strangers. The person wearing old clothes might be carrying more than you realize. The quiet person in the corner might be the reason the entire room exists. And the person you underestimate today might be the person who changes everything tomorrow. I want to hear what you think. Have you ever seen someone judged unfairly because of how they looked, what they owned, or where they came from? Did someone step in, or did everyone stay silent? Share your story in the comments, because sometimes the conversations we have after these moments are just as important as the moments themselves. And if you believe respect should come before assumptions, share this story with someone who needs that reminder. Because you never really know who's standing next to you until the truth finally steps into the room.